The Minnesota Vikings are closing in on a decision that would have seemed unthinkable just months ago. A new $10 million replacement option has emerged. McCarthy faces yet another possible demotion. Meanwhile, Kevin O'Connell has delivered a crucial update on Harrison Smith's future, and an analyst warns that growing tension between two key players could spread throughout the entire locker room. The Minnesota Vikings may need to consider adding another quarterback if they decide to trade or release J.J. McCarthy. And Tennessee Titans quarterback Will Levis has emerged as an intriguing potential replacement. Minnesota has already demoted McCarthy once by naming Kyler Murray its starter, and the young quarterback's position became even more uncertain when Kevin O'Connell divided second-team repetitions between McCarthy and Carson Wentz during Tuesday's practice. If Wentz officially wins the backup job, McCarthy could fall to quarterback 3 and potentially become available through a trade or roster cut. Gary Davenport of Bleacher Report identified Levis as one of the National Football League's most prominent cut candidates because his path to Tennessee's roster has become increasingly difficult. The Titans selected Levis with the first pick of the second round in the 2023 National Football League draft, and he started 21 games during his first 2 professional seasons. His position changed when Tennessee selected Cam Ward with the first overall pick in 2025. Ward is now firmly established as the Titans' starting quarterback, while veteran Mitchell Trubisky offers 9 seasons of experience and 57 career starts as the likely backup. That hierarchy could leave Levis without a place on Tennessee's final roster. Meanwhile, Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk predicted that McCarthy could be traded or released before Minnesota reduces its roster to 53 players. Max Brosmer is also competing for a position, although Minnesota may believe it can waive Brosmer and bring him back to the practice squad. McCarthy's guaranteed compensation makes his situation more complicated. The Vikings would likely attempt to trade him first, but they might need to pay a significant portion of his remaining salary to facilitate a deal. If no acceptable offer emerges, Minnesota could ultimately decide to waive him. Moving on from McCarthy would create a need for additional quarterback insurance because Murray and Wentz both carry significant injury concerns. Murray is Minnesota's unquestioned starter and could potentially experience a career resurgence in O'Connell's system, but he has struggled to remain consistently available. Wentz also has an extensive injury history and underwent season-ending shoulder surgery after starting 5 games for the Vikings last season. Levis would not need to arrive and immediately compete with Murray for the starting position. Instead, Minnesota could view him as a developmental option, with the size, arm strength, and physical profile to fit O'Connell's offense. Levis stands 6 feet 4 inches tall, weighs 230 pounds, and is younger than both Murray and Wentz. He is entering the final season of his 4-year rookie contract, which is worth approximately $9.5 million, and he is scheduled to become a free agent next March. Levis has not yet proven that he can become a dependable National Football League starter, but his availability could provide Minnesota with a low-risk opportunity to develop another talented quarterback. If Murray struggles or suffers an injury, and McCarthy is no longer on the roster, the Vikings could regret failing to secure another option. Levis would not represent a guaranteed solution, but his combination of youth, durability, and natural arm talent makes him one of the most logical candidates to replace McCarthy. Kevin O'Connell has confirmed that he remains in contact with veteran safety Harrison Smith, although Smith still has not decided whether he will return to the Minnesota Vikings for the 2026 season. Alec Lewis of The Athletic reported the update after O'Connell spoke with the media Wednesday afternoon. The coach did not announce a deadline or reveal whether Smith is leaning toward returning, but the fact that communication is continuing remains important because Minnesota's safety depth has already been affected by Jamal Adams' significant injury. Smith has reportedly continued staying in shape while considering his future, which has preserved the possibility of another season with the organization. The Vikings have promising options at safety even without him. Theo Jackson has provided stability and veteran leadership during the preseason, while Jacob Thomas has emerged as one of the defense's most exciting young playmakers. Thomas intercepted a pass during Minnesota's opening preseason game against the New York Giants and has recorded 4 solo tackles, 1 pass breakup, and 1 interception. Pro Football Focus gave him a 92.2 overall defensive grade through the first 2 preseason games, including a 90.9 coverage grade. Those numbers placed him among the highest-rated defensive rookies of the preseason. Jackson has not produced the same spectacular grade, but his 68.4 overall mark reflects the dependable presence he has provided. Minnesota can feel encouraged about the future of the position, but bringing Smith back could still benefit the entire group. Thomas possesses explosiveness and playmaking ability, yet immediately asking an undrafted young defender to replace one of the most experienced safeties in franchise history would carry considerable risk. Smith could allow Minnesota to introduce Thomas gradually while helping him understand Brian Flores' complicated defensive system. The veteran could also provide leadership to a secondary that has already lost Adams. Smith demonstrated last season that he can continue producing at a high level despite being 36 years old. He finished the year with 54 total tackles, 10 passes defensed, and 2 interceptions. Pro Football Focus gave him a 68.9 overall defensive grade, placing him 33rd among 98 qualifying safeties. His 69 coverage grade ranked 29th at the position. Those results indicate that Smith still has something to offer, but his age naturally creates questions about how much longer he can maintain that level. A return for one more season could provide the ideal bridge between Minnesota's established defensive leadership and its promising young safeties. Smith would not need to carry the entire secondary or play every available defensive snap. Flores could manage his workload, place him in specialized situations, and use his intelligence to disguise coverages before the snap. The Vikings must also respect that Smith has earned the right to make this decision on his own timeline. Pressuring him to return immediately could be counterproductive, especially if he remains uncertain about whether his body is prepared for another full National Football League season. Nevertheless, the approaching regular season will eventually force Minnesota to establish a clear plan. Jackson and Thomas have given the organization legitimate reasons for confidence, but Smith's experience, communication, and playmaking instincts would still strengthen the defense. The final decision belongs to Smith, and the Vikings will now wait to discover whether one of the most respected players in franchise history is ready for one more season. The Minnesota Vikings have received a blunt warning about the potential consequences of abandoning J.J. McCarthy before determining whether he can develop into a successful National Football League quarterback. Mike Florio of NBC Sports suggested that McCarthy could be in danger of losing his roster position before Minnesota reduces its roster to 53 players. That prediction led Phil Mackey of Purple Daily to ask the question that should concern everyone inside the organization. Are the Vikings completely certain that McCarthy is a bust? Minnesota selected McCarthy in the first round because it believed his talent, leadership, and developmental potential could eventually make him the franchise quarterback. Injuries and inconsistent production have prevented that plan from developing as expected, but McCarthy is still only 23 years old. Moving on now could create an embarrassing situation if McCarthy joins another organization and becomes a successful starter within the next 2 years. The concern is not based entirely on theoretical potential. McCarthy displayed meaningful flashes last season, including his fourth-quarter performance against Chicago and important throws against Detroit. He also helped Minnesota score a combined 65 points in games against Dallas and Washington. Those performances did not eliminate his accuracy, processing, and consistency problems, but they demonstrated why the Vikings originally believed in him. Mackey fears that Minnesota's constant focus on winning immediately could prevent the organization from considering the larger developmental picture. The Vikings believe they possess a roster capable of competing now, which explains why they signed Kyler Murray and named him the starter. Carson Wentz also provides experience and may offer a more dependable short-term option as Murray's backup. However, choosing the safest quarterback for the upcoming season is not necessarily the same as making the best decision for the franchise's long-term future. McCarthy is now splitting second-team repetitions with Wentz after many observers initially assumed he would automatically become quarterback 2. If Wentz wins that competition, Minnesota must decide whether keeping McCarthy as its third quarterback would help or damage his development. Judd Zulgad believes that if McCarthy eventually succeeds at the National Football League level, it probably will not happen with the Vikings. Zulgad suggested that significant issues may exist behind the scenes and described the relationship between McCarthy and the organization as feeling like oil and water. He does not believe Minnesota can simply keep McCarthy for several more seasons. gradually develop him, and eventually celebrate his emergence as a great quarterback. Something about the fit appears wrong, although it remains unclear whether the responsibility belongs to McCarthy, O'Connell, or several people within the organization. That uncertainty makes the coming decision especially dangerous. If Minnesota retains McCarthy without a clear developmental plan, the tension could continue, and his value could decline. If the Vikings trade or release him, they risk watching another coaching staff unlock the ability they were unable to develop. McCarthy has not done enough to demand the starting position, but his limited experience also makes it difficult to deliver a final judgment. The Vikings must separate frustration from evaluation, determine whether the problems are correctable, and consider whether the relationship has deteriorated beyond repair. Moving on may ultimately be the correct decision, but Minnesota must be completely confident before taking an irreversible step that could leave the organization answering difficult questions for years. An analyst believes a significant personal rift may exist between J.J. McCarthy and starting quarterback Kyler Murray, creating concerns about the atmosphere inside the Minnesota Vikings locker room. Former Vikings linebacker and K-fan analyst Ben Lieber questioned the current energy surrounding the two quarterbacks and argued that the organization must evaluate the nature of their relationship. According to Lieber, McCarthy and Murray have never shared a particularly strong personal connection, and that dynamic has reportedly existed since Murray arrived. Competition between quarterbacks is normal across the National Football League, especially when a veteran is signed to replace a young player who previously expected to become the starter. However, an uncomfortable relationship can become a larger issue if it begins affecting meetings, practices, or the confidence of other players. Lieber warned that an unspoken conflict between the quarterbacks could spread throughout the locker room and interfere with the winning culture general manager Nolan Teasley is trying to establish. McCarthy's comments during organized team activities have received renewed attention because they may have provided an early indication of the distance between the two players. When reporters asked about his relationship with Murray, McCarthy compared them to two students sitting on opposite sides of a classroom while the coach teaches both of them. Asked whether the situation felt awkward, McCarthy again described two people sitting on different sides of a high school classroom and insisted that he would not call it awkward. The answer did not directly criticize Murray, but it also failed to communicate a close or collaborative relationship. McCarthy could have praised Murray's experience, discussed what he hoped to learn, or emphasized that both quarterbacks were working toward the same team goal. Instead, his response created the impression that they operate separately. Murray is a former first overall selection who has started 87 games and earned 2 Pro Bowl appearances. Although he struggled toward the end of his time in Arizona, his experience could still provide valuable lessons for a young quarterback. McCarthy's disappointment is understandable because Murray was brought to Minnesota to take the position he once expected to hold. Even so, the Vikings need professionalism from everyone inside the quarterback room. The speculation has intensified since Minnesota officially named Murray the starter on August 11th. Florio suggested that McCarthy may not survive the final roster reduction and reported that the Vikings would likely attempt to trade him before considering a release. Minnesota's guaranteed financial obligations could complicate a deal and force the organization to pay part of McCarthy's remaining compensation. National Football League insider Jason La Canfora has also identified possible trade destinations, including the Philadelphia Eagles. None of this proves that McCarthy and Murray are openly fighting or creating a locker room crisis. The concern is based on outside interpretation. McCarthy's unusual public comments and questions about the atmosphere surrounding the position. Still, perception can become significant when a team is already managing a controversial quarterback transition. If Murray plays well, the situation may become easier because winning normally reduces internal tension. If he struggles, however, fans and players could begin calling for McCarthy, intensifying the pressure on both quarterbacks and O'Connell. Minnesota must ensure that the competition remains professional and that personal frustration does not damage the team. Whether the reported tension represents a serious rift or simply an uncomfortable adjustment, the coaching staff must address it before speculation becomes a distraction. The Vikings are approaching one of their most important roster deadlines with major uncertainty at quarterback and safety. Will Levis could become a replacement option if Minnesota moves on from J.J. McCarthy, while Harrison Smith remains undecided despite continued communication with Kevin O'Connell. At the same time, the Vikings have been warned that abandoning McCarthy too early could come back to haunt them. And questions about his relationship with Kyler Murray are creating even more pressure inside the quarterback room. Should Minnesota trade McCarthy, or would that be giving up on him too soon? And do you believe Harrison Smith will return for another season? Leave your opinion in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for the next Minnesota Vikings update. Stay tuned, SKOL Vikings. Let's go.